Shalom everyone, and welcome to Torah Defense Workshops. This is our second video celebrating our indigenous rights and title to the land of Israel. Unfortunately, not all efforts at Hasbara are as effective as we would like. Hasbara, of course, means explaining in Hebrew. It basically means explaining our cause of the Jewish people, to our rights to self-determination in the land of Israel. For example, no matter how wonderful Israel's human rights efforts are, no matter how many freedoms we afford to all the peoples in this country, if we are, God forbid, stealing another people's land, that's theft and that's a problem. So I'm going to be hopefully giving our viewers three very, very powerful of defense. Not to say that they're not used, but they're not used enough, and they are actually very poorly known in the world. First of all, we'll be talking about Israel as the world's first modern indigenous state. When we think of the indigenous peoples, any particular place of real estate on planet Earth, we think of noble tribes who perhaps have been exiled, who have been mistreated. Many times we don't think about Jews, who we think of as having been exiled to every corner of the world as being indigenous. We'll be getting into how archaeology proves Israel to be the crucible of ancient Jewish culture. We'll then get into countering the myth of the land's abandonment by the Jews and subsequent settlement by Arabs in the interim. There's this notion of most people's heads that the Jews somehow, when we were exiled from this land by the Romans after the Bar Kokhba revolt, that the land was just completely emptied of Jews for hundreds of years, and in the interim, Arabs have come and settled here and have been living here for many, many centuries. Well, for that, we'll be getting into the work of Hadrian Relandi, a world-class scholar from Holland, who, at the turn of the 18th century, visited the land of Israel, then called Palestine, in 1696, taking meticulous notes on place names and population. If you're not familiar with the work, you will be amazed at the ramifications of the observations he made and recorded. Finally, we will get into Israel as the only national homeland on earth acquired from foreign hands through self-defense alone, not only in recent times, but in the deep historical past. And of course, this conflict, this struggle for the Jewish people for our rights to self-determination in our homeland is nothing new. More than 8 centuries before the birth of Muhammad in the 2nd century BCE, Judah Maccabee, Yehuda Maccabee, who led the Maccabean revolt against the Seleucid Empire, wrote, and this is in the book of Maccabees, Lo eres nochriya laqahnu, velo birchush zarim mashalnu, ki im nahalat avotenu asher biyedei hoyevenu ba'et min ha'etim, belo mishpat nichbesha, v'anachnu ka'asher hayatha lanu et it is not a foreign land that we have taken, or the property of foreigners that we have taken over, but the heritage, the portion of our forefathers. At a particular point was fell into the hands of our enemies without any case, without any justice. Impossible for us. We simply took back the portion of our forefathers. And, of course, this is not anything new to Islam at all. As noted by Zionist Muslim sheikhs such as Sheikh Professor Abdul Hadi Halachi, Sheikh Ahmad Adwan, a Muslim scholar living in Jordan. I know that sort of seems strange, a Zionist Muslim sheikh, but yes, there are people who are wise, there are people who look at facts, there are people who are objective. And they point us to places in the Quran that say exactly what it is that that we have been saying all of these years, refuting the lie that the nation of Israel stole another people's land. They quote from their own prophet, who taught that the land of Israel was assigned to the people by Allah. As it is written, bear in mind the words of Moses to his people, children of Israel. He said, remember, my people, the favor which God, Allah, has bestowed upon you. He raised the prophets among you, made you kings, like David, Solomon, the dynasty, and also translated as possessors in Arabic, from the Arabic, and has given you that which he has given to no other nation, the written and oral Torah and the land of Israel. Enter, my people, the holy land of Israel, which Allah has assigned for you. Do not turn back and thus lose all. You'll find it in the Quran in Surah Al-Ma'idah 520. Similarly, we find in Surah 26, verse 59, the Jews are the inheritors of the land of Israel. Also in Surah Al-Baqarah, does the Quran ascribe the conquest of the land of Israel by the kings Saul and David to the will of Allah. So they, the Israelites, defeated them, the Philistines, by permission of Allah. And David killed Goliath. And Allah gave him the kingship and prophethood and taught him from that which he willed. You'll find it in the Quran in Surah Al-Baqarah 2:51. And this is according to Allah's special favor for the Jews, as is written in Surah Al-Baqarah 2:122. Children of Israel, remember the favor I, Allah, have bestowed upon you, and that I exalted you upon the nations. But we don't, of course, I can just say it's very easy to quote piecemeal from the Quran. I'm not trying to pass the message that the Quran is a theologically perfect work or a perfectly Zionist work. Okay, but thank God there are preachers of Islam, okay, who can see, who have 20/20 eyesight. Let's begin with the beautiful lines of defense that I've prepared for you tonight. One of the activists for Israel that I feel, a closest connection to, even though I've never met the person, I really do not know all of his beliefs per se, is Ryan Bellerose. Ryan Bellerose is a Native American Indian from Canada. He is Métis from the Paddle Prairie Métis settlement in northern Alberta, Canada. He founded Canadians for Accountability, a Native rights advocacy group, and is an organizer and participant in the Idle No More movement in Calgary, as well as a founding member of an Israeli advocacy group called Calgary United with Israel. And he really, has given us a gift. And there's obviously, he sees a common cause with us. He sees us as the indigenous people of this land. And I think he really has a high moral ground to be able to say that, to recognize that, due to his own indigenous identity. And what he says is something golden. Indigenous status is about the genesis of culture, not where a people originally came from. This is why we're not all indigenous Africans. By the way, if you want to participate in National Geographic's genographic project, you can actually see how the entire human race, no matter what corner of the globe we are from, we share 99.9% of identical DNA. We are all descendants, for example, of a scientific Adam. All of us men, through our Y chromosomes, we go back to chromosomal Adam. We actually had many common ancestors, I'm sure, going back into deep prehistory. We're all demonstrably descended. This is hard science to a chromosomal Eve, an even deeper prehistory. These things do not contradict the Torah whatsoever. Hashem forbid these times before time, so to speak, work very well into our day 6, when Hashem created man, raising us from the dust, so to speak, creating us from the dust into what we are today. And so race is a fiction. Race is a myth. Peoplehood is real. Okay? And that is something that he understands very deeply, and so do we. Speaking to the Jewish people, he says, the place where you, Jews, became a people is in the Holy Land, not Ur, not Egypt. Those were proto-Jews, so to speak, proto-Hebrews. They carried the blood, but had not forged an identity as a people yet. And that's just extremely important. In the first video that we did on the Jewish genes, so to speak, and Jewish memes that go back 3,500 years old, we were able to demonstrate just how deep our cultural beginnings were. And it is demonstrable that Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, is indeed the place where our culture was formed. So to me, of the hundreds of incredible archaeological discoveries that have been found in Israel, breathtaking mosaics of menorahs, from ancient synagogue floors, all sorts of ornaments, inscriptions, engravings. To me, one of the most impressive is the silver scroll. It is basically the oldest known biblical text that has been found. Amulets with the priestly blessing, the Birkat Kohanim, written on them, basically found in graves at Ketef Hinnom, dating from the First Temple period, that are now in the Israel Museum in Yerushalayim. Ketef Hinnom, by the way, is an archaeological site southwest of the old city of Yerushalayim, now on the grounds of the Menachem Begin Heritage Center. It's located where the Valley of Rephaim and the Valley of Hinnom meet on the old road from Yerushalayim to Beit Lechem. The site consists of a series of rock-hewn burial chambers based on natural caverns. Basically, in 1979, 2 silver scrolls inscribed with portions of the Birkat Kohanim, the priestly blessings, blessing from the Book of Numbers, Homash Bamidbar, and apparently once used as amulets, were found in one of the burial chambers. Delicate process of unrolling the scrolls while developing a method that would prevent them from disintegrating took 3 years. And these oldest surviving texts from the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, date from around 700 to 650 BCE. So again, besides the fact that Arab culture, the Muslim religion were definitely not formed here in the land of Israel. This is not the crucible. This is of the genesis of their peoplehood. Okay, there is a myth that basically the Jewish people abandoned the land of Israel for centuries. Okay, and in the meantime, many centuries ago, the forebears of today's Palestinians settled the land. Now, there is I'm going to say a little bit of truth. In other words, there are to this. In other words, there definitely are certain families among the Arabs that can trace their roots here for several centuries. But I'm going to say, except for these exceptional families, the story is actually much much different. Before the Six-Day War, Judea and Samaria belonged to Jordan, as Palestine is an invented country and an invented people from a historical perspective. Again, besides those few old native Arab towns that have been here for only some hundreds of years, since Muslim armies overswept the land of Israel in the 7th century, today's Palestinians are descendants of a mixture of refugees from different corners of the Near East in the aftermath of World War I. Others are, and this is incredible, descendants of Jews. DNA research proves this. Jews that remained in the land since the Bar Kokhba era with no choice but to become Muslims as their communities withered away under the impossible conditions we suffered under the Turks. We actually have a living memory of this eternal Jewish presence in the land. My personal family, while my own family goes back in the land for a little over 200 years, since 3 sets of my great-great-great-grandparents moved here from different corners of the Mediterranean, I know families, Jewish families, that have been here for much, much longer. Take the Sastiel family, for example. It has an unbroken presence, an unbroken residence in the land for some 15 generations after returning home to our ancestral heritage after the Inquisition, or one branch of the Sofer family that traces its roots to Hebron for 1,000 years, an unbroken residence in Hebron for 1,000 years, and before that to Pik'ain, their residence for a previous 1,000 years since the times of the Bar Kokhba revolt. Our living communal memory is the same. Until the late 1800s, Arabs were very few in number. Towns thought of today as 100% Arab, like Qalqilia, Jenin, etc., were largely Jewish as recently as 90 years ago. Etchings where Jewish mezuzot, door amulets, once were, can still be found on a few old doorposts, a defaced Star of David. Most of their Jewish inhabitants descended from those who survived the Bar Kokhba rebellion were forced to become Muslim. In Hebron, some Islamified Jewish families still maintain Jewish customs such as winemaking and secrecy. But perhaps the most important testimony to this is found in the account of Adriani Relandi, a Christian traveler and brilliant scholar who toured the land in 1695. But before we get there, I just want to mention something important. Jerusalem is mentioned 669 times in the Hebrew Bible, in the Tanakh, not once in the Quran. And I say that with all respect to Islamic culture, to the Arab people, okay, and there are, Baruch Hashem, thank God, alhamdulillah, many, not many, but several key and important and very heroic Muslim Zionists who tell the same. In short, Jews are the indigenous sons of this land. And no matter how many lies are told, or how many times they are repeated, nothing will change that. With all respect, okay, it is the Arabs who are the newer comers, settlers, or squatters, depending on how polite you want to be. And it's important, very much, to be polite, to maintain that mutual respect. Because neither one of us are probably leaving here anytime soon. Adriani Relandi was a Dutch Orientalist linguist, cartographer, who wrote an account of his visit to Eretz Israel, which in 1696. Okay, that's almost a little over 300 years ago. And just understand where that is in time, okay? His book, Palestina ex veteribus monumentis illustrata, was published in 1714. Relandi identifies each of the places mentioned in the Mishnah or Talmud along with their original source. If the source was Jewish, he listed it together with the appropriate sentence in the Bible. He also arranged a population survey and census of each community in the land. His most prominent conclusions: not one settlement in the land of Israel has a name that is of Arabic origin. This is huge. Most of the settlement names originate in the Hebrew, Greek, Latin, or Roman languages. In fact, till today, except Ramla, not one Arabic settlement has an original Arabic name. Number two, most of the land was empty, desolate, and the inhabitants, few in number. None of this is any great novelty here. And mostly concentrated in the towns of Jerusalem, Akko, Tzfat, Jaffa, Tiberias, and Gaza. But this isn't shocking. You got to put your seatbelt on for this. Most of the inhabitants were Jews and the rest Christians. There were few Muslims, mostly nomad Bedouins. Let me get a little bit more into that particular point. In the Galilee capital, Nazareth, he writes that there lived approximately 700 Christians, and in Jerusalem, approximately 5,000 people, mostly Jews and some Christians. The interesting part was that Relandi mentioned the Muslims as nomad Bedouins who arrived in the area as construction and agriculture labor reinforcement, seasonal workers. Again, I'm just going to repeat that. Okay? Relandi mentions the Muslims as nomad Bedouins who arrived in the area as construction and agriculture labor reinforcement, seasonal workers. In Gaza, for example, there lived approximately 550 people, 50% Jews, and the rest mostly Christians. The Jews grew and worked in their flourishing vineyards, olive tree orchards, and wheat fields. Remember Gush Katif? And the Christians worked in commerce and transportation of produce and goods. Tiberias and Tzfat were mostly Jewish, and except for mentioning fishermen, fishing in Lake Kinneret, the Lake of Galilee, the traditional Tiberias occupation, there is no mention of their occupations. A town like el-Fahim was a village where 10 families, approximately 50 people in total, all Christian, lived there. And there was also a small Maronite church in the village. Anyway, you can see all of these details in more online, and I'm going to put the links to my sources, okay, in the description to the video below. Israel, the only national homeland on earth, perhaps, acquired through self-defense alone. And of course, this may seem like a gross oversimplification, perhaps, if you're speaking about modern Israel. But I want to talk about a much, much, much deeper history than that. Before we get into the deeper history, let's first talk about what Baruch Hashem, thank God, is an argument that is being used by jurists defending the rights of the Jewish people to the land of Israel in our day. UN Security Council Resolution 242. The wording of UN Resolution 242 clearly reflects the contention that none of the so-called territories, Judea, Samaria, etc., were occupied territories taken by force in an unjust war. Because the Arabs were clearly the aggressors, and nowhere in the UN Security Council Resolutions 242 is Israel branded as an invader or unlawful occupier of the territories. Political figures and international jurists have discussed the existence of permissible or legal occupations. It's in a very important article on this question. Always remember this name, Professor Judge Stephen M. Schwedel, former president of the International Court of Justice in The Hague, who wrote as follows, quote unquote, "A state, Israel, acting in lawful exercise of its right to self-defense may seize and occupy foreign territory as long as such seizure and occupation are necessary to its self-defense. Where the prior holder of territory had seized that territory unlawfully, the state which subsequently takes that territory in the lawful exercise of self-defense has, against that prior holder, better title." He also wrote, as between Israel acting defensively in 1948 and 1967 on the one hand, and her Arab neighbors acting aggressively in 1948 and 1967 on the other, Israel has the better title in the territory of what was Palestine, including the whole of Jerusalem, then to Jordan and Egypt. Professor Julius Stone, another important name, a leading authority on the law of nations, has concurred, further clarifying territorial rights under international law by their Arab countries, armed attacks against the State of Israel in 1948, 1967, and 1973, amid various acts of belligerency throughout this period. These Arab states flouted their basic obligations as United Nations members to refrain from threat or use of violence, use of force against Israel's territorial integrity and political independence. So again, there are counter arguments. This is a blistering argument that is taking place on university campuses, places all over the world. I, however, want to talk about a much, much, much deeper acquisition of the land of Israel. And really, I think, renders all of these arguments really as superfluous. I want to talk about the acquisition of the land of Israel by Abraham Avinu, Abraham the Patriarch. Again, we simply have no source other than the Tanakh, other than the Bible, to speak about Abraham. Therefore, I bring you to Bereshit, Genesis chapter 13. And Hashem, the Lord, said to Abraham, after Lot separated from him, "Lift up your eyes, look from the place where you are, northward, southward, eastward, and westward, for all the land which you see, to you I will give it, and to your seed forever." And so, just from this, you would assume that perhaps Hashem would command Abraham to amass a great army, to go, wage a great war of jihad against the inhabitants of the land, to go crush them, and to be able to take the land by force. Abraham did no such thing. And it doesn't. And if you see the hand of Hashem, it doesn't appear that Hashem intended it for it to happen in that way. What happened was something that really, really gives the deep ancestors of our people the moral high ground, which I believe that we inherit until this day. So now we've come to Genesis, Bereshith 14. And it came to pass, in the days of Abraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Kadar, Laomar, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of Goyim, that they made war with Berah, Birsha, Shinav, Shenever. Basically what is described here, without needing to read you the entire chapter, is that you have four greatly powerful foreign aggressors, foreign conquerors, okay, coming into the land of Canaan and totally subjugating and brutally defeating the inhabitants of the land. What happens at that point is that Avram, gathering together his allies, makes a war of liberation. And in defense of his family, in defense of the peoples of the land, with just a handful of men, about 300 men. It's an incredible, when we talk about, the 300 of Sparta, there's the original 300, the 300 of Avram, not be anachronistic and say Abraham. And it's unbelievable how Avram, in an act of liberating the people of the land, comes to the point where he has the entire population in the palm of his hand to do it as he pleased. He could have, and he perhaps would have even had the moral high ground to put the wicked, sodomizing, murderous kings of Sodom and Amorah to death, and claim sovereignty over the land that Hashem had given him. But he takes nothing for himself. It's extremely important to understand that the way that the Holy One, blessed be He, wanted the people of Israel, the Hebrews, okay, the inheritors of Abraham, to acquire the land of Israel was by an act of liberation, not an act of belligerency, going in and think about it. If this is what Abraham could have done to four superpowers of the day, invading the land, could he not have done the same to the small cities, the small tiny city-states of Canaan in those days? He certainly could have. In fact, our traditions tell us that Abraham himself was a general. He was a warlord in Ur. And yet he was a person who refused to use power to achieve his aims. And this is just, it's incredible. Makes a great deal about this is Josephus Flavius Josephus, who talks about how Avram entered the land of Egypt with his captains of war. And when his own wife was taken captive by the Paro, what Avram could have done to Egypt. And yet he refused. Whenever possible, he would leave it up to Hashem. You could say that Avram was the first humanist. That is the way that the people of Israel, that the ancestors of the people of Israel, the patriarchs, acquired the land of Eretz Yisrael, not through an act of violence, not through an act of destruction, of genocide, okay, but by an act of liberation of the inhabitants of the land. Again, in short, the Jews, the Hebrews, the Israelites, my people, are the indigenous sons of this land. And no matter how many lies are told, or how many times they are repeated, nothing will change that. With all respect, it is the Arabs who are the newer comers. Settlers, or God forbid, let's not even say the word squatters, because we want to be polite as much as possible. We need to respect one another. We need to understand that there is, when we put our prejudices aside, we can look at facts and we can come to solutions. I hope you enjoyed the video. Although it took only 2 days to put together, believe it or not, we put a tremendous amount of effort to get it out in honor of Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel Independence Day. If you'd like to see our first video from defense, Torah Defense Workshops, video number 1, celebrating 3,500-year-long traditions of dress, hairstyles, and Jewish genes, answering the question, are today's Jews really from the same people who left Egypt? Click here. And if you're interested in a scholarly article bringing to light a compelling archaeological evidence, I'd say a hint of archaeological, perhaps even proof, definitely strong support that Abraham Avinu really lived after all, camels and all. You click here. Abraham's camels and the Sinai Trail. All the best. Shalom. Yom HaAtzmaut Sameach. Happy Israel Independence Day.